Thanks, everyone. I was asking whether or not I needed a mic, but hopefully I don't. We're very loud at NASCAR, so if you have trouble in the back row, or if Keenan starts falling asleep, I will know I need to speak up. So we're going to talk a lot about change and the change that has taken place at NASCAR in our communications. So I'd start with by showing you a video that we recently produced that touches on the same topic.
The faces have changed. The cars, the numbers, the names have changed. The tracks and the scale have changed.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
The speed, the technology, the fans, the hairstyles, the clothing, and the sweethearts have changed. The heroes and the villains have changed. Everything has changed.
I mean, this is the greatest day of my life.
Nothing has changed.
So let's talk about NASCAR. How many people here have been to a NASCAR race? How many people have watched NASCAR on TV? All right, everybody, whoever didn't put their hand up can leave now. And I'll give you guys credit. No, I'm just kidding. I'm glad to be in a state where it's as popular as it is. We had to change the way we did communications at NASCAR, and we actually had to change our whole business model back in 2009. So a lot of things that went on. Some of you might have lived through it, but there was a pretty big hit on our overall markets. We had the media landscape changing. We were getting revenue pressure from our sponsors. And our chairman, Brian France, made some pretty bold decisions that we're going to talk about, which is how are we going to evolve our sport to be more relevant to you? And how are we going to maintain our fan base as well? So don't want to lose our core fans. We want to keep and build new ones. How do you do that? It's a very tough thing to try to manage through. So we actually went outside and commissioned a study to look at us. And outside is the key word here, because we would only have credibility if we had some people who were looking at our sport without having to be invested in it as much. So they took a look at it, and for us to say to teams and tracks and others in our industry, here are some of the changes we need to be made, this is based on some external evaluation that we did. So what resulted from that was what we call our industry action plan. So we're now in probably the second, third, fourth year of it, in which we identified several key pillars of how we needed to change our business. So you see them up here on the screen, but ultimately, I hope that as you go through the presentation today, as you view NASCAR, as you look at our videos, as you see our advertising, that you start to see this. So I'm hoping this gives you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain on how we work. So if our external work is doing a good job, it should be reflected in it. So that advertisement you saw at the beginning, look at it through the different prism of after this presentation. How did what that bozo on the front stage say? I can see how that worked its way through the presentation. So driver star power, needing to elevate the level of knowledge about our drivers. The event experience needed to evolve in a big way. Just down the street, Talladega, where we're racing this weekend, had to completely reduce and change the structure of the facility. Millennials, we were struggling with people in your age group. How are we going to get you to follow a sport like NASCAR? Youth, which is really directed toward our future, that we need to have a 10 to 15 year plan. And the fact is that the old way that NASCAR was built and became such a huge popular sport was passed through generations. So the dad took the kid, and the kid grew up and took that fandom and brought his son and his daughter, and they populated it. And that no longer happens as much because of the way our world is. You don't have that traditional family structure. And NASCAR being 62 years old, that's how we built the sport, because it was passed on from generation to generation, not being done as well. Multicultural, still struggling with perception that we're white, Southern, male sport. We need to change that perception, and the way to do it is to make sure that people see the sport for what it truly is and not what they think it is. Product relevance really goes to what is the sport, And every sport, everything you see is a product. So NBA's got a product, the NFL has a product, NASCAR has a product. So how do we stay relevant so that you are interested in watching on TV or following a driver or going to an event? And last but not least, we were behind in digital social media, and we needed to make a really big change there. So here are just kind of a couple of things we made changes on. We basically developed an industry service function. That means nothing to you. It shouldn't mean anything to you, but for us it was, because we were so successful. The way I would describe it is NASCAR would simply make sure we would race and it'd be all fine, and the teams would do their own thing and the tracks would do their own thing. The whole industry, though, didn't work together, because the Brinks truck would roll up in front of our offices and hand over millions of dollars, and the same thing would happen at all the other places. That doesn't happen anymore. So we've had to work more as an industry, and so we created a fairly large department within NASCAR that is focused solely on helping the teams and tracks build their business models well. We needed to lead as an organization and not just rely on them just to turn on the lights and that everybody would be coming in. Changed our marketing approach. You'll see that throughout my presentation. Changed the way we sold our sport. We basically said to Turner, who was our digital operator, thank you for the millions of dollars that you give us every year, but we don't want your money anymore. Because we had sold the rights to Nascar.com to an external agency who had to be revenue driven. And what happened, and this is important for you communication folks, is that we lost our voice because we could not control what they were doing on the site. We had an agreement and all this stuff, but what happened was that they had to be revenue generating to be able to go against their P&L, and some things that needed to be done, we just couldn't get done. Seems kind of weird, right? It's your website, but ultimately they owned the rights to it through our agreement. So we basically turned down their money, got out of our contract earlier, built a 70-person digital operation in Charlotte, and now own the rights and sell the rights through NASCAR.com over the last couple of years. Changed the way we work in our R&D center. Laura Finley, who's sitting here in the front row, who works with me, works out of Concord, just moved up there from Daytona Beach where she started. And then what we're going to talk about tonight is we move to an IMC model. So IMC stands for Integrated Marketing Communications. And it's not just 3 words. You can come in, feel free, except in NASCAR, if you're late, you're usually 3 or 4 laps behind. Just remember that. So Integrated Marketing Communications instead of PR. So that's not just nomenclature, it's the way we work. So integrated is important because we needed to make sure that we worked with each of the individual units within our business. So we actually build 20 communication plans for NASCAR. There's a business communications plan. There's a marketing communications plan. There's an R&D center communications plan. And that becomes integrated throughout the organization as opposed to just going off and doing stuff in silos. And as you get into the business world, you'll find that a lot of companies struggle when they move into this silo business and they don't pull together. So they look to us to kind of bring that together. And the marketing component is because we've moved away from the PR people who are just selling the sport the way the marketing people want you to, and make it more of a concerted, collaborative effort. So I think I've kind of touched on this, a lot of fancy words, but overall, it's moving away from just a lot of random responses, coordinating And I've been doing it the last 48 hours. Poor Dr. Billings had to put up with me having to dip away for a couple issues that came up that we had to deal with Texas Motor Speedway, so that we have something to prepare for when we're there in a couple days. In fact, we had these penalties a couple days ago and dealing with that tomorrow. Our drivers are all going to go in front of the media tomorrow, and they're all going to state their opinion on our penalties that we handed out on Tuesday. So what we do as an IMC unit, and again, it's not public relations because it's working directly with our drivers, so it's more internal. We talk to them, we explain to them what's going on. This is why we made these decisions, because they're going to have an inordinately high influence on people's perception about what we did. So we need to be coordinated with them. And I'll show you some examples of places where we weren't necessary. So the mandatories when I'm hiring people, when we're building a team, and the way we function are quite different than the way the NASCAR PR machine, honestly, was built. So it's getting a versatile roster of talent. And that could be people who have knowledge of the sport, people who have knowledge of digital, but making sure that your team has strengths and weaknesses, all right? That goes to diversity and in terms of our priorities from a diversity perspective. One of the first things I did when I was hired there 3.5 years ago, I started asking a lot of questions because I'm a real pain in the ass. And one of the questions I asked was, okay, so who on our team, which is 30 plus people, speak Spanish? Nada. Not a single Spanish speaker on our entire PR team. Well, the world today and the impact that Hispanics can have on your business, you've got to be in that space. So the first person I hired actually was a woman who I knew from my tennis days, where we had a much more kind of global, a diverse team, and brought her on board. Focusing on objectives and measurement results, I hope you guys have gotten that in your classes. You know, that's got to drive your business. And in communications, a lot of people think of it as a nice to have. It needs to be seen as a revenue generator. And the only way to do that is to make sure that everything you do has an objective behind it. And I met with some of the students today, and that's what I was kind of hammering on a little bit, was the objectives and how, if they were following that and staying true to it. Consumer insights fuel strategy. I'll give you an example of that coming up, but I'll give you a real example that just happened. So we handed out these penalties on Tuesday to our drivers who were involved in a very fun brawl after our race on Saturday night. So a lot of different opinions on whether that was the right thing to do. So we had to make some decisions. Do we announce this? Do we make our vice president of competition available to the media? Do we put out a press release? How do we do all that? So we ultimately made a decision, and the first thing we looked for was what was the response. So we got some reports, some information, what we were seeing, what we were reading, what we were hearing, and then made a decision that we actually don't need to be proactive the next day to try to defend our decision. All right, so today I said, well, I think we're in a pretty good place. Sent out an email to several members of my team. I said, my gut is we're pretty good, that we don't really need to worry about this quite yet. I said, but give me the data. Well, the data said, yeah, the conversation has dropped, but the negativity about your decision has actually risen, 19%. All right, so my gut, based on what I was reading or hearing while I was driving to Tuscaloosa, was that we were okay. But the research and the data told me differently. So basically I sent that report out and said, I think we're in good shape, but we need to make sure we get to the drivers tomorrow morning before they talk to the media and tell them why we made the decisions. We're not telling them, hey, say this, say that, whatever, but we're getting them informed, okay? And that's part of what a communications team will do. Is it's not necessarily public relations. It may be 1 or 2 steps removed from it, but it's affecting, and those are the most important influences in our world. If our drivers hate something, love something, then that will influence how the fans feel.